Okay, reading through, the main organs of our digestive system form a tube that goes all the way through our thoracic and abdominal pelvic cavities of our body. I usually call it the gastrointestinal tract or GI tract. You also see it listed as alimentary canal, although really I only read that and then never call it that again. It runs from the mouth to the anus, includes structures like the mouth, the pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, and large intestine. Okay. That's, I guess, what they've got colored here in black. The exception, I don't know why they don't color the mouth black. Includes parts like the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. Those are all part of the small intestine. All these different things with colon are part of the large intestine. We're going to go through all those here in this lecture. There's also a lot of accessory structures that do not perform any digestion or absorption, but assist in the process. Some of which are found in or around the mouth, like your teeth, your tongue, your salivary glands. But then there's three very large important organs. Your liver, which is the largest organ of the body, actually, internally, I shouldn't say the largest total because your skin's bigger than it. But largest internal organ, the gallbladder, which is very closely associated with your liver, and then the pancreas. Some of those we've talked a little bit about before. Our tract itself is about 5 to 7 meters or 16.5 to 23 feet in length in a living person. And I, put the caveat in here in a living person because after we die, we lose the tension in the muscle that lines our tract. And actually the tract will actually grow in length. Okay. The majority of the length comes from the small intestine. Obviously we're not 16.5 feet to 23 feet in height, which is important to note that there's a lot of twisting and turning, especially within the small intestine. Here we can see cadaver's belly, where all the small intestine is. There's some twisting and turning with the large intestine, but your small intestine is by far and away the longest portion of the tract. Embryologically, our tract forms from a tube-like structure, which then develops outpouchings, which are the things that evolve into our digestive organs of the pancreas, liver, and gallbladder. There are storage, excretion, and detoxifying sites located along the length of the tract. When food passes through the lumen or internal cavity of our tract, it's not technically inside of us until it passes through the wall, through absorption, into the blood or our lymphatic vessels. So like the breakfast that you had, we're currently digesting it. A lot of that's probably now moved into your small intestine, where we do the majority of our absorption. Until that stuff is moved into your blood or lymph, it's still technically outside of us, which seems kind of weird, but that's really the kind of technical way we describe it. As a whole, our digestive system functions to transport food and water, but more importantly, to modify our food and water to make them suitable for absorption, which is really the main goal, why we ingest anything, so that we provide the nutrients that we need for various functions, and then what we don't digest gets excreted out of our body, which I'm actually describing some of the treatment processes of our food in the digestive system, beginning with ingestion, the process of eating, continuing with what we call propulsion, the movement of food along the tract, and that takes place right away when we swallow food, which is pushed down into our stomach by way of a process called peristalsis, which is a series of alternating contractions and relaxations of smooth muscle lining our walls of the digestive organs. The key with peristalsis that separates it from segmentation is that peristalsis produces the movement of food going forward only. So it's always pushing it towards the end of the tract, whereas segmentation, which is a form of mechanical digestion, can move food forward and backwards. So it's going to help, go in both directions. I always, kind of use the analogy of like squeezing a toothpaste tube. There's kind of two ways to squeeze the toothpaste tube: the right way, the way I do it, and the wrong way, which is the way my wife loves to do it. Okay. These are arguments you get into when you get married. I like to perform peristalsis, so I like to grab the toothpaste tube always kind of towards the back end and squeeze it towards the cap, always pushing that toothpaste out. My wife loves to just grab it and squeeze from no matter where it's at, so she negates all the work that I do. She performs segmentation, I perform peristalsis. So hopefully you can kind of remember it that way. Secretion is the production and release from a cell or gland of a physiologically active substance. We do a lot of that. Salivary glands contribute to that, all the way down to the anal canal where we're secreting mucus and other stuff to help get stuff out. Mechanical digestion is a process of physically breaking down food into smaller pieces. First time we do that is when we bite into and chew our food, and that continues with muscular churning of our stomach through that segmentation process that I was just talking about. Mechanical digestion is a physical breakdown, whereas chemical digestion is a chemical breakdown, which is carried out by enzymes that we find in our stomach and small intestine. This is where we're, breaking chemical bonds, performing chemical reactions called hydrolysis reactions, taking two amino acids that are bonded together and breaking them apart, breaking what we call the peptide bonds. Stuff I really don't get into in this class, but I do in physiology. And the whole goal and reason why we do that is for absorption, the movement of molecules from our digestive tract to blood and lymphatic vessels that are found within the walls of the tract, which can be done by passive diffusion or active transport processes. Really won't get into any of that. We don't absorb everything, anything that's undigested, or we just didn't have enough time to absorb it, is defecated out. That's what pooping is. We all know that, through the anus. So looking at the pictures, you can see a lot of different things. As I've mentioned, we're going to be talking about the different parts of the tract and whatnot. We'll start at the mouth and work our way down to the anus, just like food does. I'm not going to worry about this picture or this picture because we'll get into and zoom in on things and identify them a little bit easily as we go through. I don't know if easily is a word, but I just said it, so we'll go with it. Now, before we talk about the mouth specifically, I want to talk about the tract as a whole and its wall makeup. Okay, once again, our GI tract is a complex tube that runs from one end of the body to another, from our mouth to the anus. Okay. Now, our mouth and our upper esophagus have some of these layers, but not all of them. But from the lower esophagus all the way to the anal canal, these 4 layers will be prominent and have the same kind of arrangement, regardless if you're looking at the esophagus, the stomach, small or the large intestine. They all have an inner lining known as a mucosa, just like what we saw with the trachea. Mucosa is innermost. In this case, the serose is the outermost. So, just like I told you with the trachea, might not be a bad idea somewhere in the margin. Keep your head straight. We're working deep to superficial. Okay. The mucosa is a mucous membrane lining the inside of the digestive tract. Our mouth and the upper parts of our esophagus have a mucosa. It is 3 layers thick, the innermost of which is called an epithelium, which is what faces the lumen. The middle layer is a lamina propria layer of connective tissue, and then it actually has a layer of smooth muscle called the muscularis mucosae, which is smooth muscle, as I think I just said. The overall function of mucosa is to secrete mucus, pretty straightforward based on the name. Also, it secretes digestive enzymes. We actually release hormones that help regulate various aspects of digestion. There's a lot of blood vessels in this layer, which are where we do a lot of the absorbing. They're not really shown there in the picture, but this is where a lot of the stuff that we digest down to the simple things like amino acids, this is where they go into the bloodstream. We also have, and we've talked about these very recently, mucosa-associated lymphoid tissues within that lamina propria layer. Remember we talked about Peyer's patches of the lymphatic system? This is where they would be located if we were specifically looking at the ileum of the small intestine, which we're looking at the small intestine here. I can't tell you if this is the ileum or the duodenum or the jejunum. We could pretend and say it absolutely is the ileum. So yes, there are Peyer's patches, which are the little green blobs there. Surrounding the mucosa is the submucosa, made up of areolar connective tissue, where there's a lot more blood vessels. There's also lymphatic vessels, lymph nodes, and nerve fibers. Speaking of nerve fibers, there's an extensive network of neurons that surrounds it and controls the secretion of the glands from this layer, what we call the submucosal plexus or plexus of Meissner. Not to be confused with the myenteric plexus, which is associated with the muscularis. Our third layer, and based on its name, should be pretty dang common sense that this is where you find the muscle. What type of muscle and how much muscle is dependent upon where you're at in the digestive system. In our mouth and the pharynx, it's going to be made up of skeletal muscle, which is important for the voluntary aspect of chewing, or excuse me, of swallowing. After we look at the pharynx, everything else, it's all going to be smooth muscle, which we know smooth muscle is involuntarily controlled, and we don't have to have any conscious awareness of it. It's just being done for us. Our stomach has 3 layers, the most amount, which is because our stomach does a lot of turning and twisting and breaking down our food. Our small and large intestine contains only 2 layers, and they're associated nerve fibers, which is that second plexus I just mentioned, the myenteric plexus, also known as plexus of Auerbach, which I didn't even list up here. And then finally, the serosa is the outermost. It's a serous membrane, just like the serous membrane that we just talked about around our lungs, composed of areolar connective tissue with a layer of simple squamous epithelium called mesothelium, which you can see areolar connective tissue, epithelium surrounding it. Another term for the serosa is the visceral peritoneum because it forms a portion of the peritoneum that will be discussed on the next page. Peritoneum is like the pericardium and the pleura that surround our heart and our lungs, respectively. Our esophagus is a structure that lacks a serosa and only contains a single layer of areolar connective tissue, what we call a adventitia, or the adventitia. Okay, I do actually want you to know this image. What I want you to know, we'll just kind of start here on the left side. I want you to know the lumen. I want you to know the mucosa in its 3 sublayers. The submucosa, the muscularis in its 2 layers here labeled circular and longitudinal. If this was the stomach, there would be a 3rd layer, but this is a small intestine. I'll explain why I can tell that next time. Know the serosa in its 2 layers. Know the myenteric plexus. And then the submucosal plexus. You don't have to worry about the stuff that's in parentheses there for those 2. Now, next time we meet, we'll talk about the mesentery and what we call the peritoneum. But we don't have time, so we'll stop here.